Right. Former President Jacob Zuma's legal team have, during their arguments, accused the media of having a narrative in which they see Zuma as the man who messed up the country. Advocate Muzi Sikhakhane made the statement while addressing the chairperson of the state capture, Judge Raymond Zondo. Now, to give us some thoughts into Zuma's recusal application is Lawson Naidoo, Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. A very good day to you, and thank you so much for joining us. You wrote an article yesterday about how far we've come in the country in terms of fighting corruption. And now you hear today Advocate Muzi Sikhakhane saying everybody has already made up their minds that this man has messed up the country. Your thoughts?
Well, good morning and thank you very much. Look, I think what we've heard this morning is a very cogent exposition of the law around the standard to be applied in a recusal application. Advocate Sikhakhane has, dealt with the law very clearly. He's stated his case. I think the difficulty that he faces, as he himself has acknowledged, is that he has a mountain to climb to make the link between that exposition of the law and the facts in this case. So the issue here, I think, is primarily that yes, many people in South Africa have made up their minds that Mr. Zuma is corrupt, that he presided over the 9 wasted years that led to the extensive looting of state resources and so on. But to relay that and to say that sits on the shoulders of the Deputy Chief Justice is an argument that I don't think he's going to be able to make, because I think certainly in the statement that the Deputy Chief Justice made at the beginning of today's hearings was to seek to put his version of the facts, as Mr. Zuma had stated in his affidavit, to effectively set the record straight and to say, this is my view of our interactions over the years. There is no bias on my part. And I think many South Africans would sympathize with the certain comments that the Deputy Chief Justice has made when he's heard evidence, shocking evidence about the nature and scale of corruption. And I think all of us would sympathize with the Deputy Chief Justice when he's made those comments. To suggest, therefore, on the basis of that he is predisposed to make findings against Mr. Zuma, I think is unwarranted. And certainly, I think Mr. Sikhakhane is going to have a battle on his hands to make that argument convincingly.
And although he put forward very strong legal arguments, but he based them mostly on previous cases. Is it a bit problematic that we're not dealing with the material elements of Mr. Zuma's case?
Well, I think he's still to come to that. I think he started off, as I said, by setting out what the law says, what the academic analysis says. He's talked about the psychology of it all, about the jurisprudence as well as legal academics writing on the subject. He's now going to have to come to the issue of saying, well, this is the law, and if we apply the law to the facts here, this justifies the recusal of the Deputy Chief Justice. And his argument is going to be that Mr. Zuma has a reasonable apprehension that the Deputy Chief Justice may be biased against him on the basis of comments that he's made and the manner in which he's conducted himself when listening to the testimony from other witnesses, primarily those witnesses that have come forward with evidence of Mr. Zuma's complicity in state capture and corruption. So I think that's still to come. And as I say, I think he's going to have a difficult task to persuade not just the Deputy Chief Justice, but the people of South Africa that Mr. Zuma does indeed have, or there are grounds for Mr. Zuma to have such a reasonable apprehension of bias.
As you say, quite impressive how Advocate Sikhakhane put forward his arguments. But what were your thoughts about the Deputy Chief Justice's statement?
Well, as I say, so far, I think Mr. Sikhakhane has done exceptionally well in laying out what the law is and his interpretation of the law. He says that he has difficulties with the judgment of the Constitutional Court in the Selful case, but unfortunately, he is bound by that legal precedent, and he's going to have to make out a case as to why this matter is different and why the grounds do exist for the recusal of the Deputy Chief Justice. As I say, I think he's got a long way to go in doing that. The Deputy Chief Justice certainly one can say, pulled the rug from under his feet earlier this morning by setting out his version of events in terms of the personal interaction between himself and Mr. Zuma over many, many years, dating to the early 1990s. And he's set out that it was a professional relationship based on his role as an attorney. Their interactions subsequently have been at government functions and not at social functions, as Mr. Zuma has alluded to. And, quite clearly says that they are not friends. And, he is therefore, more than capable of presiding over this matter, in which Mr. Zuma's testimony is, of course, critical to determining the allegations that have been made about state capture before the Commission of Inquiry.
And also that emphatic statement about something that has been said by the former president before, that they had a conversation about possible conflict of interest. The Deputy Chief Justice coming out to say that conversation never took place.
Well, indeed, so he's rebutted certain of the factual allegations made in Mr. Zuma's affidavit. He's pointed out to the fact that he became a judge in 1997, long before Mr. Zuma became president, and therefore could have had no real influence on his judicial career, as it is alleged. So I think that factual statement from the Deputy Chief Justice is something that Mr. Sikhakhane is still going to have to deal with in trying to discharge the responsibility on him to show that this perception of bias that Mr. Zuma has is in fact a real one.
But also Advocate Sikhakhane touching on the fact that he himself has a personal relationship with the judge. Why did he feel the need to disclose this?
Well, I'm not sure
especially at this time,
why he did that. He's made it very clear that he himself, is not accusing the Deputy Chief Justice of being biased, of not being impartial. And I think that those concessions that Mr. Sikhakhane has already made makes his task that much more difficult. And it's not about, as he says correctly, it's not about actual bias, but it's about perceived bias or perceptions of the impartiality of the Deputy Chief Justice, in particular when it comes to the testimony of Mr. Zuma. But we go back to Mr. Zuma's evidence before the Commission in July of last year, where, I certainly believe that the Deputy Chief Justice bent over backwards to accommodate Mr. Zuma, gave him ample opportunity to make an opening statement that took a lot of time. And then when the issue of his examination by Mr. Pretorius took place, Mr. Zuma then changed his attitude and became evasive and didn't want to answer questions and claimed not to have memory of certain events that took place. So that's the background against which I think all of this is now going to be heard and played out. And the Deputy Chief Justice is going to have to make a decision on this recusal application at some point.
Just trying to have a crystal ball, looking ahead to the rest of the session today. Advocate Sikhakhane ended off before going to that adjournment by asking the judge, what have you done that has made us believe that you won't come to a fair conclusion? What do you think the advocate will be saying?
Well, I think he's really going to have to draw on, as is set out in Mr. Zuma's affidavit, examples of where previous testimony has been heard and the interjections and questions and comments by the Deputy Chief Justice, and to lay them out in a way that puts forward a case for why recusal should happen in this manner, in that Mr. Zuma perceives that he's not going to be treated fairly. But as the Deputy Chief Justice has said on several occasions already this morning, he hasn't made up his mind about any of these matters, and he will have to weigh the evidence before him when he produces reports and makes findings and recommendations in relation to Mr. Zuma's conduct, whether or not Mr. Zuma actually gives substantial testimony to the Commission, which he has as yet not done.
You're also a legal practitioner, and you've been watching the State Capture Commission processes unfolding. Do you think the judge should recuse himself?
Well, I'm not a legal practitioner. I'm a legal observer. But as I've said, I don't think Mr. Sikhakhane has made out such a case as yet. I think on the basis of having read Mr. Zuma's affidavit, I don't think a substantive case has been made out for the recusal of the Deputy Chief Justice. And I would be surprised if there was any other decision other than the application for recusal being dismissed.
It's strange you should say you're a legal observer, because in my head I was thinking advocate. I don't know why, but perhaps that's something you should be doing in the future. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lawson Naidoo, the executive at CASEC, trying to protect the Constitution.